I guess we're in my car again. I'm parked somewhere. So, you're never truly alone. There's always some soul out there to keep you company. But what is the soul exactly? Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor, says that the soul is reason, the passions, and our will, especially as tied to its relation to the body. He was working off of Aristotle, who was working off of Plato. And they had identified various things. So, Aristotle had his theory of, I forget the exact word, but it's like his theory of appeals, and how you ingratiate anyone to any particular idea. And he had identified the Logos, the Pathos, and the Ethos. The Logos is the word. It's the full notion of knowledge. It's sort of the inner being within Sophia, which is wisdom. The Pathos is all of our emotions and desires. It's where we get the word pathology. And the Ethos is something like custom. It speaks on character. Extrapolated, it can speak of aesthetic to some degree. Ethos is the place where we get our word ethics. But seeing as how it's custom to some degree, it is an outward expression, as well as sort of the inward state of consideration. So you can't really have ethics without the will acting through it. So in that way, the Greek concepts of ethos and thelema are two sides of one coin in the idea of will. And then logos, pathos, and ethos can be attached to the idea of soma, which is the body, which is where we get the word somatic. Aristotle and Plato before him also identified Ousia, Eidos, and Idea, and highly. Ousia is substance, and it's not any one particular thing. Everything has substance. A very form of a tree or a table or a chair generally all share the same substance of wood, though they're not all the same thing. And then Eidos, which translates to form, is the commonly held form of what could be the idea of many things. So, a table, crafted in whatever way it is, be it a coffee table or a dining table or a drafting table or an office table or a park bench or whatever have you, are all tables because they share that form, table. But its ideation, the ideal of what it is different. The difference in say, a drafting table and a dining table comes from the idea, where we get the word idea, or manner in which it exists. A dining table is flat and is made to eat off of. A drafting table is not necessarily a horizontally flat plane. It can be tilted upward, and is not meant for eating. At least it's not supposed to be. It's the nature of its order. But they so in that there are different ideas about what the form of that table is. And then those three things, Ousia, Eidos, and Idea, are attached to highly, which is a Greek word meaning wood. So it turns out that the Greek philosophers never really came up with a word to mean physical materia. So Aristotle used the next best word that he could think of, since a craftsman uses wood to create his the objects of his craft. And so he described all of existence as being crafted out of a wood of some kind of universality. But in these different theories of things, it's always identified that there is some kind of substrate of reality, some seminal matter from which things spring from, which could be argued to be our reasoning, or the logos, the very representation of logic and what is, or a substance of things, the Ousia. All of that begins to bear a form, or otherwise Eidos, or in the case of reason, gets processed as the passions, which themselves are the Pathos. But they only really reach true expression through some kind of will of that thing, which, it's the natural progression from reason, passion as will. So to the customary action that arises out of the logos and the pathos is the ethos. And when substance attains form, it begins to reach an idealized state in which it becomes a thing. Otherwise, the Ousia, through Eidos, attaining the manner of idea. And then all of these, after moving through these, has a wholeness to it. And the only way that we can really know that wholeness is its expression in reality, which, for the case of the reason, the passions, and the will, it's attachment to the body. For the case of the logos, pathos, and ethos, it's the highly, or its very thingness crafted out of the wood of all of reality. And in the case of Ousia, Eidos, and Idea, I have that backwards. Logos, pathos, and ethos is attached to the soma, the body that bears the logos, pathos, and the ethos. And then Ousia, Eidos, and Idea, in its most final form, to experience it in the world, is to experience it through its highly, or through its physical expression, in nature, as it were. And so if that's the soul. Oh, before I forget, not to make not to lose track of the subject in itself, but the soul, as described by the Greeks, was called the psyche. It's where we get our word psyche for the mind, and it's the same place that Aquinas comes from when it comes to the consideration of the soul. The soul very much is made out of the faculties of the mind, because it's through the mind that we exist, that we witness our own existence and all of existence around us. So, in the very idea of the soul, if it's made out of the reason, the passions, and the will, and if existence itself is full of ideas whose form is substantiated, then the most perfect idealized forms, who do have substance in reality, are pure concept. They're universals that don't necessarily need a firm physical expression right in front of us for us to identify that they exist. We know the redness of an apple is a thing. We know that laughter can exist. We know that birds can fly, though it's not guaranteed that when we opine on these notions that we are witnessing it at that very moment at the same time. We can know things that are happening in other places and other times, and in that way those things still exist, even if they're not being readily expressed in reality at the very moment in our very locale. So, if things can exist without physicality, and we know that the soul is made up of the reason, the passions, and the will, and these highly complex structures interact with themselves and each other and everything else, then we can conceive of the idea of the soul without the physical body. To an extent. So far as we know that the soul is what animates any given body. So there's always some attachment to the body in that we experience other souls through their bodies initially. Or that can even be said that the bodies that we experience in the world are expressions of the soul. However, fascinatingly, there's only one thing that truly has a soul, and it is man, it is humanity. One could argue, well, what about animals? Well, they still have to be servile to their own ideas of what their form should be doing, which happens through instinct, which is a thing that humans are not bound to. We have true free will, in that we can defy the very ordering of what our animal bodies, our creature selves, demands of us. We can go without food. We can meditate upon those things that are hard. And we can receive the notion of things unseen. And in that way, the human soul is different from the animal spirit, in that our free will gives us the ability to conceive of so much more than what any creature could possibly fathom. So, in lieu of that, we know that the soul is a unique thing, for one. We know that as far as this extrapolation goes, that the soul can exist without a physical living body when it comes to its conceptual reality. And so in that way, and we also know that the soul is uniquely human. So in that, if the human soul, different from the animal spirit, can exist without being bound to the physical realm, then it goes to be said that anyone who has ever lived, anyone who is living, and anyone who will come to be exists somewhere in eternity. They might be in some kind of well of souls yet to be born into reality. They might be in a sort of post position of reality, in accordance with the summation of their experiences, or they can be here in the world, in existence. And if there are other souls in other places all throughout eternity, then, well, you're never truly alone, are you? If there are saints above and suffering below, you're never truly alone, are you? Even when you're at your most lonesome, there are other souls out there who can hear you, who know you. And if we were to believe the golden legend of all of history, then there are saints waiting for you, waiting to hear you cry out to them, waiting to bring your words to the rest of eternity, and to the source, the wellspring of all things. If you ever truly feel alone, know that you're not. That at the very least, the very Mother of God is with you. That Jesus, having lived with Tacitus, the Roman historian and senator, having recorded of Jesus, and Josephus, Jewish historian, having written on him as well, knowing that he once was and truly walked on this earth as a living person, as any other living person, had a mother, and he was born into this world. And if you had a mother, then it would go to say that the most blessed Virgin Mary is real, that she exists. And if she exists, and she has a soul, and she's united to God in such a way, then certainly she, at the very least, could speak to his divine person in the rest of eternity. in that way, certainly if we speak to her, if we cry unto her, she can intercede for us in our requisitions of grace unto things higher. And if she truly is, and God truly is, and a church was born out of his ministry and her faith, then so too are the saints. And so all of Christendom is there. And you're never alone. At the very least, I'm here. So, don't feel so afraid. Don't feel like the world is too big or too small. Because it's only the world. It's only this physical plane of reality. Eternity is so much bigger. And there's so much more meant for you beyond all of this. It's nice talking to you. See you next time.